The Empire of Noxus is one of the most feared in all Runeterra. Their military is a force to be reckoned with, their ambition is unparalleled, and to stand in their way is to join them, whether you want to or not. The conquering Noxian spirit has made them the dominant nation on the northern continent of Runeterra and beyond, with no signs of slowing down, at least not if their leadership has anything to say about it. Now, there's so much that we have to cover today, and even then it's only going to be the tip of the iceberg, because Noxus has been a fixture of Runeterra lore for the entirety of the world's history. I wanted to cover this region fairly early in my Runeterra 101 videos because Noxus is very relevant to the lore as it currently stands. The area obviously played a very large role in Arcane, and it's also going to be one of the main settings for the Arcane spin-off show. But as of right now, the amount of rapid developments to Noxus lore should be slowing down at least a little bit in between larger releases. However, as I will probably have to say in some form in every video in this series, Riot Games is notoriously bad at keeping its canon consistent, so I'm sure some things will eventually change. Point is, everything in this video is accurate lore to the best of my ability, at least up until the point that this video is published. If and when Riot Games decides that everything needs to be different at some point in the future, well, I'll cross that bridge when I get to it. But enough with the disclaimers, let's begin with the fun stuff. This video is going to be divided into several sections, and we will jump right in with the history of Noxus. The founding of Noxus begins long before we will talk about anything actually called Noxus, and the reason for that is that we have to start with a story that will set up some very important characters. The first of these characters is San Uzal, a warlord and quite possibly the most successful warlord in the entire history of Runeterra. Uzal was a fanatic, following a religion simply known as the First Truth. The doctrine of this religion promised him incredible power after his death, and a seat alongside the gods in a realm known as the Hall of Bones. As the name probably very heavily implies, power in the Hall of Bones was not something that was gained through peaceful means. It was gained through strength, bloodshed, and sacrifice. Not your own sacrifice, of course, but sacrificing anyone who happened to get in your way. In his dedication to this cause, San Uzal conquered and killed a lot. We don't exactly know how much, but we know it was enough that his rampage through the northern continent of Valoran eventually attracted the attention of an extremely powerful demon. This demon's name was Otacon. Demons in Runeterra each have domain over a specific emotion, though they do kind of play it fast and loose with what counts as an emotion. In Otacon's case, he was the demon of ruin, and the ruin that San Uzal was leaving in his wake provided a nice trail that Otacon could use to track him down. This culminated in a bloody battle, and though San Uzal and his warriors were eventually able to defeat Otacon, it did not come without loss on their side. Most importantly, the best general of San Uzal, a man named Katash Li. San Uzal was not the type of man to simply take a loss of this nature, though, and once the demon was subdued, he ordered his own sorcerers to use Katash Li's helmet as part of a ritual that would bind the general's spirit to the demon itself. Thus, Katash Li was reborn, at least in a sense, and Otacon's power was at Uzal's command, making the conquest ever more bloody. We don't know too much more about Uzal's life after this for reasons that I will get into later, so for purposes of our storyline, we're just going to fast forward to the warlord's death. After all, at the end of the day, no matter how much power he had gained, San Uzal was still just a mortal man. Don't worry about that ominous music cue, everything is fine. Eventually, Uzal passed away, as all men do, and that's the end of that section of the video. Stop looking at me like that, we're gonna move on to the next part. That's a totally normal transition and nothing suspicious is going on at all. Now that we've talked about Uzal, let's talk about the people that he conquered. I mentioned a moment ago that his rampage took place in the northern continent of Runeterra, which is called Valoran. At the time of Uzal's reign, this area was not populated by a nation or anything like that, but rather a group of loosely organized tribes known as the Noxii. While Uzal did technically unite these tribes into an empire temporarily, it was a tyrannical one reliant on him, and with the empire's leader and best weapon no longer present, it eventually broke down into tribes once more. Exactly how much time passed between San Uzal's death and the next event we're going to cover isn't known, but what we do know is that it was long enough that stories of San Uzal transitioned from history into legends and folklore, so it was a good chunk of time. What is the next event that we are covering? Well, that was something called the Darken War. Now, the Darken War will be covered in more detail in the Shurima 101 video, as that was where it started, but I will summarize it quickly now just for reference. The Emperor of Shurima is murdered, and in his absence, the entire nation breaks down into chaos, with his best warriors splitting off into factions that then entered into a long and bloody conflict. And since those warriors were superpowered demigods hopped up on blood magic, it caused a lot of problems. The war was so large in scale that it spread to damn near the entire planet, and as happens in these situations, people began looking for powers of their own that could protect them. The Noxii were one of these groups, and a cabal of sorcerers stumbled upon something quite valuable: whispers in the dark of an old, long-dead warlord who promised power to any who could return him to the world of the living. This warlord was San Uzal. I mean, we all knew he was coming back. I was not exactly subtle about that, but how many of you guessed it would be this quickly? So the sorcerers assembled what they needed for the ritual, and if you think that resurrecting a dead warlord who promised great power was a bad idea, yeah, it absolutely was, but they had insurance. See, names have power. That's a very common element across a lot of magic systems, and despite how shrouded in mystery the story of San Uzal was, they knew his name, and that meant they could control him. With their method of control established, the sorcerers enacted their ritual and were successful. The spirit of the great San Uzal was returned from death, and he immediately slaughtered the sorcerers like sheep because this was his plan the entire time. Well, maybe not the entire time. If you'll recall a few minutes ago, San Uzal was doing all of his violence and conquering in the name of gaining power in the afterlife, so you might think that the power he was hoping to use on the material plane was this strength gained from the Hall of Bones. But no, that was all a lie. Uzal's religion was wrong, just straight up entirely incorrect. When he died, he did not show up in the Hall of Bones, and there was no Hall of Bones at all. He entered into an underworld that was simply a gray void filled with lost, broken souls, and this outraged him. Uzal's willpower was so strong that he would not allow even death itself to defeat him, and so he used what he had, taking the ambient magic from the underworld and teaching himself Oknun, the ancient language of the dead. It was with Oknun that he manipulated the sorcerers into bringing him back. That was his idea, and it wasn't just the minds of mortals that he shifted, he also used Oknun to alter himself. Over however long he was dead, the warlord changed, embracing his new power and goals and becoming something else entirely. San Uzal was gone, and in his place was a name spoken only in the language of the dead: Mordekaiser. This new form of the tyrant started his work immediately, stripping the defeated sorcerers of their very souls and forging them into his new weapon, a mace which he dubbed Nightfall. Then he proceeded to, well, let me put it this way. San Uzal was the greatest warlord in Runeterran history when he was alive. He was only brought to heel because of that tiny little weakness known as human mortality. Now, that wasn't an issue anymore, and he was back fueled with undead magic. So he was quite a bit better at doing violence. He didn't even really need to build up a new base of followers. With his newfound power as the Iron Revenant, Mordekaiser resurrected the souls of his own armies and reclaimed others who were previously in his service, including Otacon. He also had plenty of other powerful entities bound into his service, including another demon named Tybulk and a captured Yordle named Vagar. With a truly obscene amount of power under his name, Mordekaiser wins, basically. He conquers a larger empire than before and rules it with the most literal iron fist for about 3 centuries. This empire is not Noxus. We're not quite there yet. Actually, I don't know if there is a canon name for Mordekaiser's empire, and if there is one, I couldn't find it, so if you guys know, please tell me in the comments. What I do know the name of is the headquarters of this empire, a massive fortress known as the Immortal Bastion, built by Mordekaiser as a symbol of his power. The Immortal Bastion remains an important location in Noxus all the way up until the present, and one of the people responsible for its importance was a sorceress named LeBlanc. LeBlanc was one of Mordekaiser's acolytes from the early days of his reign, but would not stay in that position for very long. Not much is known about LeBlanc's early history, as she keeps it very intentionally secret, but we do know that during her time in Mordekaiser's inner circle, her opinions on the Iron Revenant's reign began to turn. This was not because she had any sort of moral objection to the terrible things that the tyrant was doing, but rather because she noticed that Mordekaiser would kill and betray and torment anyone if it suited him, and as a woman who wanted to gain power for herself, LeBlanc did not think that he was stable enough to remain in charge. After some time, LeBlanc decided to act, and allied with a powerful man in the region named Vladimir. Now, Vladimir is not originally from the Noxii tribes. He was from a far-off land named Camivor, then ended up in Shurima, where he was taught blood magic. The details of that will be discussed in other Runeterra 101 videos, but for now, know that he's basically a vampire. Technically, he is not, but for all intents and purposes, vampire. Thanks to his magical ability, Vladimir was basically treated as a god by many of the Noxii tribes, and the combination of his power and influence, as well as LeBlanc's capability and inside intelligence, was enough to spark rebellion. The Noxii marched on the Eternal Bastion, and in the middle of the battle, LeBlanc and Vladimir were able to successfully sever Mordekaiser's soul from the material realm, casting him back to the underworld for all eternity. Oh look, there's that music cue again. I'm sure everything is great. Also, in the aftermath of this fight, Vladimir and LeBlanc are able to enslave Otacon. He does not go free a second time, which will matter later. Regardless of that though, this is a massive victory for the Noxii. The tyrant is dead and they are freed from his reign. As for what LeBlanc and Vladimir are doing, they vanish. I'm telling this story in a very specific order on purpose, so for now, they vanish. Though, while LeBlanc and Vlad were not immediately public figures after this, the organization that they created through their alliance would continue to grow and blossom like a flower. Wonder if that word choice means anything specific. You might expect very reasonably that at this stage we are finally at the formation of Noxus as a nation, and not quite, we're like right there, but there is one more event that I need to hit very briefly. The Noxii tribes don't unify immediately after Mordekaiser's defeat. That would take another few decades and another global conflict known as the Rune Wars. I won't go into the details of that here, but there was a lot of insane magical power being tossed around, and many tribes retreated into the safety of the Immortal Bastion to wait it out. This caused them to unify a bit more, and when they emerged, they formed the nation known as Noxus. Thus, over 10 minutes into this thing, we are finally at Noxus, and this moment in time is an extremely important one, not just because it's the founding of what we're talking about, but because this is what the Runeterran calendar is based around. I've been avoiding using it up to this point because I had to get to this point in order for it to make sense, but since Noxus is the greatest conquering empire on the planet, they are the ones that have determined the standard calendar. The year markers are BN and AN, that being before Noxus and after Noxus, and the founding of Noxus is 0. At this point in the video, we are going to speedrun through a whole lot of history. Why do we have to do that? Well, League of Legends and Arcane and most other Runeterra stories that matter take place just before 1000 AN. So there's a big chunk of time between what we've been talking about today and the rest of the stuff that we're going to be talking about. We're going to revisit some stories from this time in the character section of the video, so Scion fans, don't worry, I have not forgotten about you, but right now we're just going to hit some generic stuff that will establish the next major story we'll be covering. Basically, even though the region is far more unified and is no longer scattered tribes, they continue their history of conquering a whole lot of places. A new city known as Noxus Prime is established on the ruins of the Immortal Bastion, and they spread from there. Noxus gets big, real big, absorbing plenty of smaller nations and city-states during its expanse. This also leads them to getting in a whole bunch of wars against everywhere too big for them to immediately absorb, most importantly the neighboring nation of Demacia, which was founded around the same time. Noxian expansionism is supported by its culture. Now there's a whole section on society and culture coming up later in this video, but there is one point I have to hit now because it's very important context for the next major storyline. Noxians value strength above everything else. This is a trope that you've probably heard before. It's very common for more quote-unquote evil fantasy empires, but Noxus handles it differently in a way that makes it stand out from the rest. Strength, in the Noxian sense of the word, does not just mean physical strength. It can mean that, but a better way to put it would be to say that strength is a shorthand for the power to exert one's will onto the world. If you've seen Arcane, which I assume that the vast majority of you have, there's a scene where Ambessa explains this very nicely, but I will do it myself as well, just for anyone who needs a refresher. Noxian strength can take 3 forms, which for ease of explanation, I will describe using Dungeons & Dragons stats. The first one is might. This one is physical capability, strength, dexterity, and constitution. If you can exert your will by punching it into whoever or whatever stands in your way, then you are exemplifying the pillar of might. The second pillar is vision, best compared to intelligence and wisdom. Most often we see this as analysis of situations, the ability to make accurate predictions and strategic plays, but the intelligent part comes in because vision can also apply to creating things, like weapons or medicines. Then the third pillar, guile, is the stat we have remaining, charisma, with a little bit of wisdom thrown in there as well, I guess. Guile is cleverness, trickery, and the ability to manipulate others, exerting your will on the world subtly, or even getting others to exert your will without them realizing that's what they're doing. If someone exhibits one or more of these traits, they have a future in Noxus, end of sentence. Noxian society is notably absent of things like racism, sexism, and classism. As long as you can prove your individual capability, that's enough for you to rise. This is real interesting. It makes Noxus one of my favorite regions on Runeterra because the implications are really cool in practice, and again, we're going to talk about that more later in the video, but you needed to know that for the next part of the history section. Now, as promised, we're going to zoom way forward on the timeline and land in the early 980s. Noxus has remained an expanding empire during this time, and as an empire, it has an emperor, currently a man named Darkwill. And come on, his name is Emperor Darkwill. I think you can guess that he's going to be evil. Two important facts that you need to know about Emperor Darkwill. One, he was a member of a secret Illuminati-like organization named the Black Rose, which is something you probably all recognize. For now, don't worry about them. They're a shady Illuminati group. That's bad. They're probably not going to be much more important than that, right? And fact number two, possibly due to the influence of the Black Rose, Darkwill was crazy. As he aged, Darkwill became obsessed with immortality and did wilder and wilder things in the name of achieving it. To that end, he set his sights on a nearby nation known as Ionia. In Darkwill's defense, if you want to find immortality, Ionia is probably the place to do it. Out of the entire planet of Runeterra, it is the most magically infused and attuned to the spirit world. Noxus found out about Ionia's power first when a general, whose name you might recognize, Ambessa Medarda, led a small-scale quest there and brought back some quite powerful magical runes. Brief sidebar, but this is the canon reason why Ambessa is so high-ranking within the Noxian military structure. Emperor Darkwill was very pleased with the magical knowledge that she had brought him and thus gave her a lot of power. After some years, Darkwill's obsession became so vast, totally not due to anyone influencing him, that he ordered a full-scale invasion of Ionia, marking one of the most important periods in Noxian history. Now, invasion and conquering were nothing new to the Noxians, but Ionia was different. For one, I mean, just look at the map. Ionia is not that close to Noxus in the grand scheme of things, and this would be an invasion by water. Noxus had a strong navy, of course, but a full-scale sea invasion was still a difficult task. Given that the Ionian invasion was an invasion, most of it happened on Ionian soil, and so we'll cover a lot of the details in the Ionia video. But for today, we are going to cover what Noxus did, why it was so horrible, and the effects that it had on the Empire going forward. So, a lot of conflict in Runeterra is somewhat nuanced, right? In the current canon, there is no nation that is purely good or purely bad. All of them are populated by humans, or human-like beings, and so there's a lot of layers to everything that happens. Let me get something real clear here. In the Ionian invasion, Noxus, they were the bad guys. No debate to be had about that whatsoever. This invasion was purely fueled by Darkwill's own insanity, and especially since Ionia was actually able to put up a fight, his insanity about the situation just got worse and worse and worse. Darkwill ordered awful things to be done. It is 100% canon in Runeterran history that Darkwill intentionally sent child soldiers to fight the Ionians, not because he wanted to use them to bolster the numbers of his troops, but because he thought the Ionians would face moral conflict about killing children and wanted to use that as a way to get them to stop fighting. Holy fucking shit. Even for Noxians, that was a lot, and so probably needless to say, Darkwill was not very popular towards the end of the war, and it was the beginning of the end for his reign. The man most instrumental to Darkwill's eventual fall was Jericho Swain. This is a name we're going to return to a lot, so let's rewind a couple of years and talk about how he gained his influence. Jericho was a nobleman, born into a wealthy and powerful family that was also connected to the Black Rose Cabal. At this stage of Noxian history, the Black Rose was integrated into basically everything, from the Shadows of course, but they had a whole lot of power, even over the Emperor, at least for a while. Remember, I said that Emperor Darkwill was connected to the Black Rose, but eventually he severed that connection, and the Black Rose wasn't particularly happy with that, so they set up an assassination plot. As a member of the Cabal, Swain found out about this plot, but he was disillusioned with the Black Rose as a whole and did not like the influence that they had over his nation, so he turned on them and exposed their plans. And boy, did he expose them in a big way. Not only did he find out everyone who was involved in the assassination, he gathered all the proof that he needed to condemn them, and then publicly executed the members of the Black Rose for an attempted attack on the king's life. This, understandably, made him very, very popular with Emperor Darkwill. This, of course, also led to the Black Rose as an organization entirely crumbling. Their plots had been exposed, many of their members had been killed, they were defeated. There's that damn music cue again. As one of the Emperor's most trusted generals, Jericho Swain was at Darkwill's side for many years through the Ionian invasion. Actually, he was sent to the Ionian front lines during this, which is a little bit weird and unconventional. I'm not going to use the music cue again. I mean, I probably will during the course of this video, but not twice in a row so quickly. During his campaign in Ionia, Swain and his army suffered an embarrassing defeat. His forces were entirely routed in what originally should have been an ambush that the Ionians found out about, and even Swain himself suffered losses, with him losing an arm to the Ionian warrior named Irelia. He was left for dead, and would have died if it were not for the interference of a magical being, the demon of secrecy known as Raum. Raum used his power to reveal to Swain the truth of why he was in Ionia in the first place. Him being sent to the front lines of this battle was not arbitrary, it was done at the manipulation of LeBlanc, the sorcerer who founded the Black Rose. Yes, she was still alive after all this time. She had gotten into Darkwill's head, and it was her manipulation that caused all of this. She was the one that drove him to obsession with immortality. She caused the Ionian invasion, and since Swain was a danger to the Black Rose and had damn near destroyed them, she wanted him gone. But of course, Swain survived, and with renewed hope in this new source of power that he had found, he returned to Noxus, where he did not find immediate success. He was now gravely injured, unable to fight, plus his campaign in Ionia had failed, and in Noxus that's pretty damning. But he did not give up, of course. Jericho wasn't that type of man. Instead of giving up, he learned. Swain studied magic, he studied demons, he studied Raum, and in doing so, he discovered something incredible. Swain discovered a method that allowed a living human to bond with a demon. This has, to my knowledge, never been done before or since. Even in Otacon's case, the man he was bonded to was dead at the time of the ritual. So rare and buried was this magical technique that it is explicitly stated even Raum itself, a demon of secrets, did not know how to do this until Swain figured it out. So as you can assume, this made him incredibly powerful. He didn't act on it immediately though. Swain was too smart of a man to just barge into the palace and kill Darkwill on sight. He bided his time, waiting years and amassing a group that would support him in his coup. Helping him out in this case was the fact that Darkwill was just becoming less and less popular by the day. Remember how he sent child soldiers into war? Yeah, that's not his only war crime. Not only did he deploy chemical weapons against the Ionians, he was the one who called for the chemical weapons to be invented. These weapons were designed by another familiar face, or half-face, I guess, Singed, or Dr. Revik, whichever you want to call him. You know how towards the end of Arcane, it is implied heavily that he's gonna do some more work with Noxus? Yeah, it's chemical weapons that are used on Ionia. So with Noxian sentiment not very favorable to Darkwill in the first place, and Swain having both the power and intelligence to capitalize on it, the revolution was not difficult. It stated that it only took one night for Swain to take over the throne. But he didn't become an emperor. Jericho Swain had seen his fill of emperors, and instead he established a ruling council known as the Triferix. The Triferix consisted of 3 members, each one of them exemplifying one of the Noxian ideals of strength: vision, might, and guile. The seat of Vision was held by Swain himself, the seat of Might was held by Darius, an orphan boy who had fought his way up the Noxian military ranks on his own will and power alone, and the seat of Guile was held by a woman known only as the Faceless One. Sidebar here, I don't know who the Faceless One is. That might seem obvious because she's called the Faceless One, but I don't mean it's intentionally left mysterious. I don't know if Riot Games knows who she is right now. In the card game Legends of Runeterra, there are cards representing the Triferix seats. They have the faces of the members on them, and the Guile card is LeBlanc. Unambiguously, that is definitely her. It's also kind of implied that LeBlanc is the Faceless One for reasons that we're going to get into in a minute. But apparently, she's not the Faceless One, and this has been officially confirmed. I've been told that by a lot of people. But when I looked into that myself, the official confirmation is a tweet. A tweet from someone at Riot, sure, but it's one tweet saying that it is not LeBlanc. So I have no idea who it is under there, but I feel pretty confident saying that it is either LeBlanc or someone who works for her. I don't know more than that, but I'm comfortable leaving it there because LeBlanc is a very secretive person. She has plans on plans on plans, and so the identity not being locked down makes sense. Okay, well, I'm cutting in here after the fact because apparently a recently released story about LeBlanc confirms some new information that doesn't actually answer questions, but does support the idea that Guile is probably LeBlanc or one of her agents, and it sort of blurs the line between the two of those things. Quote from LeBlanc in this newly released lore: "My lesser sisters are scattered throughout the countless nations and kingdoms of this world, at any given moment engaged in schemes and machinations without number, each sincerely believing they alone are the one true LeBlanc." So she has a bunch of clones. Maybe Guile is one of her clones. Again, this is rapidly developing lore. It should slow down now that the Noxus season is over, but I'm sure I'm going to have to publish an update to this video once the Arcane follow-up show comes out. That's almost certainly going to change timeline things, as I've mentioned already. But for now, this is what we got. So now that sidebar may have raised a question, why is LeBlanc, or one of her agents, on the Triferix? Aren't her and Swain notably enemies? Yes, they absolutely are. But she has been way more involved in everything than I have officially stated. I have revealed a couple of times in this that the Black Rose has been behind various events. They were behind the assassination attempt of Darkwill, they were behind the Ionian invasion and sending Swain there, but they actually weren't just responsible for those individual events. They were responsible for the whole thing. LeBlanc, as the leader of the Black Rose, was getting a little bit unhappy with the status of the organization. It was becoming very much an organization for noblemen and not really something that she could control in a way that she liked. And this entire thing was basically a reset button. The assassination attempt was meant to fail. LeBlanc was the one who leaked information of it to Swain. Then she allowed the Black Rose to be exposed. She allowed many members of her organization to be killed, and in fact, she was killed along with them, at least publicly. That's right, I didn't mention it earlier, but LeBlanc was among the Black Rose members who were quote-unquote executed. All the others were executed, of course, but she managed to survive thanks to some magical trickery, and then she rebuilt the Black Rose in a way that she wanted. Not only did she let Swain rise to power, she orchestrated it. She wanted a leader that she could manipulate, and so she manipulated him into the throne. She got Darkwill to invade. She got Swain importance in Darkwill's eyes. She was the one who set up Swain to find out about the demon, and then she secretly assisted him in taking over Noxus so that she could gain 1/3 of the Triferix. And all of this while Swain thought that he had defeated the Black Rose for good. LeBlanc basically handed that man a knife, let him cut his own puppet strings, and then drop from them into a trap 10 times the size. So, now those of you who didn't know Runeterran lore before Arcane kinda get why people were freaking out when the Black Rose showed up in the show. They're really important. They're big and they're scary, and no one thought they were gonna be in Arcane until they were. I screamed. I remember watching that episode for the first time. I screamed out loud in my apartment. At this point, we are almost at modern canon. After his rise to power, Swain ends the Ionian invasion. That was Darkwill's war. It's not going well. He pulls out of it. The Triferix remains. That is currently the Noxian government. Now we need to talk about this as it relates to Arcane in the timeline, because there have been some recent changes. One of the reasons I waited so long to make another Runeterra 101 video is that I really wanted to start with Noxus because I knew it would be popular. But the problem, not that this is really a problem, I like this, but the thing that held up the video was the fact that Riot Games has recently changed how they release new lore. They have it tied largely to the League of Legends in-game seasons. Each season is connected to a region, and we get a lot of lore about that region as the season progresses. This season was Noxus. A lot of the information that I have told you in the past 27 minutes has been from the last couple months of lore releases. Sun Uzal's history was expanded upon, Otacon is an entirely new thing, and as of days before I'm recording this, the last cinematic of the season has released. So I can talk about it. I didn't want to do it yet because I knew anything I said might be immediately proven outdated. And I am so glad that I waited because it paid off. The new cinematic is really short, but it's wildly important because it gives us a little bit more information on when Arcane happens in the Runeterran timeline, which we actually didn't 100% know yet. This cinematic features LeBlanc and Vladimir. They are talking to each other, still doing their Black Rose stuff, in the presence of a chained Otacon. They are discussing how they are going to use Otacon's power and influence to make their next move, and that next move is in Ionia. But that's actually not the thing that gives us timeline information. The thing that gives us that is Vladimir's response. He says, quote, "The new Grand General would never approve another campaign in Ionia. That means at the time of this, Swain is in power." This answers something that has been hotly debated for a while now. We knew that Arcane took place around Swain's rise to power. That bird at the end of it, that's one of his minions, so we knew that he was going to be relevant in the upcoming events, but we didn't know if it was setting up for his rise to power or if he had just risen to power, and this confirms it's the latter. We also know that Swain's rise is fairly recent because of Singed. At the end of Arcane, Singed has not yet made the chemical weapons which are used towards the end of the Ionian invasion. Presumably that happens shortly after the show, and that is one of the things that leads Swain to overthrow Darkwill. So unless they're changing the timeline, which, I mean, that's entirely possible, but I can't operate under that assumption, Arcane happens, and then some span of maybe like a year or two takes place. Then we have these cinematics, which are laying groundwork for more Noxian action in Ionia, though it seems like this will be more covert rather than another full-scale invasion. So to wrap up this section, let's make this like a real history class and try to slap a number on it. Keep in mind these are going to be estimates because I don't have all the information, and even the information I do have is a little bit shaky, but I'm going to do my best. The quote-unquote current year in Runeterra, as established by League of Legends, which is the most modern thing, is 997 AN, possibly encroaching into 998 or 999, the timelines aren't perfect, but somewhere around there. The Noxians pull out of Ionia in the year 989, and apparently Singed uses chemical weapons in 987. So with that information, we can roughly estimate that Arcane takes place in the Runeterran year 986 or early 987 after Noxus. This puts it approximately 10 years before current League, which, yeah, that makes sense. And if you're wondering why the characters in League don't all look necessarily 10 years older than they do in Arcane, I kind of describe League of Legends like Smash Bros for the Runeterra universe. You can learn the lore by characters and character interactions, but like, don't take everything you see in League as up-to-date canon. That's not what it's made for anymore. And ultimately, none of this really matters that much. I just did this math stuff for fun, but they can change the timeline however they want, and probably will as Riot restructures everything for the Arcane era. Oh, and if you're wondering what LeBlanc and Vladimir's plan for the new Ionian invasion is, I'm not really sure because that stuff hasn't come out yet, but it might have to do with resurrecting Mordekaiser again, and I should probably bring that up. Mordekaiser was not really defeated. I mean, he was defeated, but not once and for all. Mordekaiser has just kind of been hanging out in the underworld, building an army. When he died the first time, he spent that time in the underworld planning for the second go-around. And in that second go-around, when he had undead magic, he was specifically killing people so that he could build up an army in the afterlife. He's basically the Tyrant King of the underworld now, essentially a death god. It's been said before that Mordekaiser was so annoyed there were no gods to greet him on his first death that he decided to become one of those gods under his own power. And now he's just hanging out in his underworld palace, waiting for someone to summon him again so that his undead legions can take over Runeterra for a third time. That has not happened yet, of course, and who knows when and how it will. It's kind of just a Chekhov's gun that Riot can use for something later, but it is his status quo in League of Legends, like the version of the Iron Revenant that you're playing as is him as the King of the Underworld. And with that, I believe we have covered the founding of Noxus and the important events to its current status quo in enough detail that we can move on. As it stands currently, Noxus is an expansionist empire led by the Triferix, but with the Black Rose still pulling a lot of strings from the shadows. Exactly how many remains to be seen, but they're definitely influential. So we can move on to part 2 of this video, Noxian Culture and Society. This is going to be fairly quick actually, because thanks to the way that Noxus was created, I covered a lot of it already. We already talked about the Ideals of Strength thing and the Triferix, but there are a few other points that I should hit. A lot of you have probably picked up on this already from general information and visual aesthetic, but Noxus is very heavily inspired by ancient Rome. Imagine a more fantasy version of that and you'll have a good approximation of their culture. While Noxus is largely disliked by the rest of Runeterra, as they are fiercely expansionist like we've mentioned several times, they are not without their positive qualities, importantly the absence of racism, sexism, etc. that I mentioned earlier. This puts Noxian takeover in a very interesting position because it's not always bad for the people who are getting conquered. It's typically bad for the rulers of those newly Noxian areas, of course, but there are documented cases of slaves and other lower class people finding better futures in Noxus because their background does not play into how they are viewed. Say you were a servant in a small nation. If that nation gets conquered by Noxus and you can prove that you have some level of strength or intelligence or cleverness, congratulations, you are on the exact same level as any other Noxian citizen. Contrast this with a nation like Demacia, who is often represented as the quote-unquote good guys of Runeterra, especially in the older lore. Well, in Demacia, circumstances of your birth that are out of your control can get you imprisoned, exiled, or worse. That would not happen in Noxus, even though they look evil from the outside. Now, this is not to say that Noxus are the good guys. They are still super violent and expansionist and have caused a lot of problems for a lot of places on Runeterra. And even when it comes to their good qualities, these are ideals and not always perfect in practice. Noxus has noble houses, they have nepotism, they do have some class issues, and of course the Black Rose is a present force that manipulates things from the top. But still, in theory, and often in practice, they are less bigoted and discriminatory than other areas. However, their attitudes towards magic are still not necessarily the best for mages. Remember, in Runeterra, most magic is something that you are born with. For a quick comparison, I usually say it's kind of like the X-Men, mutant genes, things like that. In Demacia, that's just gonna get you murdered. But in Noxus, you get to go to school. Noxus has magic academies, probably 2 of them, but the reason that I say probably is the canon around this topic is very shaky. It's a cool enough thing that I wanted to mention it, but know that this stuff might be getting phased out of canon slowly. The first mention of Runeterran magic academies comes from the game Legends of Runeterra, which talks about a place called the Ravenbloom Conservatory. We only know about it because the League character Annie goes there. I'll talk about her more in a minute, but for now, she probably burned the place down. Well, to be more specific, she definitely burns it down. That's not up for debate, but we don't know whether it got rebuilt in any capacity. Flavor text on the Ravenbloom Conservatory cards also mentions another school called the Roseguard Academy, and that one might have more history, or it might not exist. This is where we get a great example of me having to piece together different bits of canon to make things work when it comes to Runeterra's lore. We know that the character Rel was kidnapped as a child and taken to a secretive academy run by the Black Rose. This academy is never technically named beyond just the academy or the facility, not even in the Ambessa novel where Rel and the academy play a much more prominent role, but we do know that Rel eventually ends up destroying it. And since the Ravenbloom Conservatory Runeterra card's flavor text mentions the quote, Roseguard Academy's dismal failure, it's not that much of a leap to assume that this is where Rel was trapped. But that is kind of an assumption. The Ravenbloom Conservatory could be the same academy rebuilt after Rel destroyed it the first time, or maybe there's more than just the 2 and Noxus has these secret academies all throughout its lands. I'm not really sure, but ultimately we know that these schools do exist, and that's all we need to for this part. See, we don't really know too much about the inner workings of these magic schools, but they can tell us a lot about Noxus's attitude towards magic as a whole, that being weaponize it. You're not going to be discriminated against in Noxus for simply being magic-born. In fact, that is a form of strength that is incredible and should be respected. But if you have such an incredible form of strength and are not using it for the benefit of the Empire, that's frowned upon. This leads to a sort of dichotomy, where the magical academies are schools if you are willing to use your magic to further Noxian expansion, and more like prisons if you are not willing to do that. Plus, the arcane era of Runeterran lore is really casting the Black Rose as an organization that wants to control magic in as many forms as they can, so yeah, being born magical in Noxus is great, as long as you're willing to use that magic in the quote-unquote correct ways. But enough about how Noxus conquers and controls people. What do they do for fun? What about Noxian entertainment? Surely that's not as scary. Except it absolutely is. They like gladiator fights. Like I said several minutes ago, Noxus is in many ways fantasy Rome. Rome had gladiators, and Noxus has the Reckoners. Many Reckoners are professional fighters, with the most important being Draven, younger brother of Darius, who is on the Triferix. Draven is, to put it simply, an extremely overconfident, annoying asshole, but he also happens to be so good at his particular brand of showy fighting that he basically revived Reckoning as a sport. Arena fights, complete with spectators, had been a thing in Noxus for centuries, but they were kind of starting to lose their shine as they were mostly practical and not purely for entertainment. Then Draven entered the scene and was just so immediately popular among crowds that he basically turned the entire thing into more like, well, I'll be real, more like pro wrestling but with real stakes. This was actually great for a lot of Reckoners, as the job became a lot more dramatic. Reckoners became characters, they had gimmicks and personalities, and this meant they had fans. Therefore, they would get killed in the arena a lot less often, as fights would be called before there was a murder. People wanted to see their fan favorites returning, and so they couldn't kill them off so easily. It did not, however, help the other people in these fights. It is still Noxus after all, and Noxus is still very violent. Hell, the main fighting pit in the capital city of Noxus is called the Fleshing Arena. That's not a good sign. Not everyone in Reckoning Pits wants to be there, because these fights are also used as a form of execution by the state. So imagine like The Rock and John Cena armed to the teeth, fighting a bunch of political prisoners. There are several League of Legends champions who have been Reckoners at some point, Alistair, Riven, Rel, and Xin Zhao specifically, plus Draven of course, and Draven is the only one of those 5 who wanted to be there. Also, because I know somebody's gonna bring it up, yeah, this is also kind of a real thing from their Roman inspiration. There were prisoners in actual Roman gladiator fights. I don't really know how to segue out of that, it is just true. Finally, before we move out of the society and culture section, I do want to touch very briefly on Noxian military techniques, mostly because they are extremely varied. As you can probably guess at this point, there's not much in terms of weaponry that Noxus will not do. They have conquered a whole lot of places, and if they find something that they can weaponize on their travels, they absolutely will do it. Fighting techniques, scientific breakthroughs, magical discoveries, Noxus will use it all. They even have a specific unit of undead soldiers known as the Grey Legion. This makes fighting Noxus damn near impossible a lot of the time, not just because of their raw power, but because of their unpredictability. Noxus might bring anything to the battlefield, which means their enemies have to be prepared for everything. As a good example of this, basilisks. These monstrous reptiles are the most favored Noxian mount. They don't really ride horses, they ride these things instead. They are essentially living battering rams, exactly the kind of thing that you would expect a Noxian soldier to ride, but they are not native to Noxus. Basilisks were originally found in Shurima, but then when the Noxians discovered them, they had to have them. And yes, this does mean that Noxus has territory outside of Valoran. Most of their empire is there, but they do occupy a good stretch of land across the northern Shuriman coast. And then that segues nicely into the final part of this section, not really a military tactical thing, but I didn't know where else to put it, the Noxtora. These are gate structures that you see in a whole lot of art of Noxian-controlled territory. They are built over the roads of places that Noxus conquers as a symbol of their power. There's not really a lot of lore to them, it's just a thing that Noxus does, but I thought it was an interesting enough cultural point that I definitely wanted to include it. If you're going around Runeterra and you see a Noxtora gate, that means you are entering Noxian-controlled territory and should be wary. But as we move down from the large scale into talking about some specific Noxians, I should remind everybody again that you can say what you want about the Noxians, but you cannot say they aren't open-minded. Sure, their open-mindedness is most often used in the context of warfare, but they really do view everyone equally, though this just means an equal ability to be conquered. Does this make them good? I would say no, but it definitely means that they are not the worst that they could be. There is nuance to Noxus, and now hopefully you understand why a lot of people who know Runeterra lore are really excited for the Noxus-based show. Arcane is already famous for having very nuanced characters and being a show where very few people are truly morally good, but everyone has good and bad within them, and Noxus is such a good backdrop for a story of this nature. I am ecstatic for what they're going to do with it. We'll see how they handle it, of course, but I am optimistic. If they handle it well, oh boy, that show is going to be gut-wrenching. Now, who are some characters from Noxus that we might see in that show? Let's go into some specific champions. Here is the complete list of Noxian characters that we are going to be talking about today. Now, if you're a big Runeterra fan and don't see your favorite on this list, don't worry, I did not forget anybody. I just decided that some characters would be best suited for other videos. One of the goals of this Runeterra 101 series is to mention every single playable League of Legends character at least once. I have a whole document on my computer that I'm checking them all off on as I go, so they will all get brought up at some point. For today's purposes, given that Noxus is so expansionist, a lot of Noxian characters have stories that take place very heavily in other regions, and since I'm breaking these videos down by region, a lot of Noxian characters are going to be moved to those other videos. For example, Urgot is Noxian, but his cybernetic parts come from Zaun. Kayn is Noxian, but his story requires mostly context from Shurima and Ionia, and without that it won't make a lot of sense. So just kinda trust me that I'm trying to do this in a way that will flow the best for new fans when it comes to who gets brought up and when. Everyone will get mentioned, and if you disagree so strongly with my choices of when to do that, write your own video. We'll just go in alphabetical order, which means that we're going to begin with a character who's going to introduce a wild concept that we haven't talked about yet, Alistair, and therefore, Minotaurs. Yeah, there are Minotaurs in Runeterra. They're a whole species, though not a particularly common one, typically only existing in one mountain range. They're also not very well liked by a lot of other races, who tend to view Minotaurs as monsters, despite them having a developed civilization. But the Minotaurs had a chance to change this reputation when they were offered a chance to join Noxus. And yes, offered. This was done through diplomacy, not conquering, which is fairly rare. This, understandably, left some of the Minotaurs a little bit suspicious about the situation, and Alistair was among these groups. He and his clan decided to reject the Noxian offer, but when they got to the meeting to go through with that rejection, other clans did not feel the same. Most of the larger Minotaur clans had already pledged themselves to Noxus, and that meant that Alistair and his people were the enemy. Thus, he and his warriors were captured, and Alistair was sent to the Reckoning Pits. He was forced to fight here for years, but eventually befriended a servant girl named Ialea, whose homeland had also been conquered by Noxus. With Ialea's help, the two formed an escape plan, and Alistair broke his way out. Tragically, the Noxians found their escape plan halfway through, and though Alistair was able to fight them off, he lost track of his new friend during the chaos. He was able to escape as well, albeit separately, and now wanders the southern Noxian territories by himself in search of the girl who helped him gain his freedom. Yes, he is technically a fugitive, but his escape happened in the reign of Borum Darkwill, and so minor escapes like his were largely forgotten in the chaos of Swain's rise. Alistair's story is very sad, and the next one isn't much happier, because now we're at Annie. Now, I briefly mentioned Annie earlier in the Magic Academy section, but she's worth talking about more because her backstory is terrifying. Annie herself was not born in Noxian territory, but her parents were. Their names were Grigori and Ameline, and they were fugitives from the reign of Borum Darkwill. Specifically, Ameline was a former student of the Ravenbloom Conservatory. When Ameline was pregnant, she spent some time working on a teddy bear that she intended to give to her unborn daughter. And the moment she finished making that bear, she immediately went into labor and gave birth to Annie. That's surely not a bad sign for anything creepy, right? Unfortunately, Annie's mother would not live too much longer to help her daughter through the weird magical things that she would experience, as Annie and her father were both infected with a disease that Ameline cured at the cost of burning out her own magic and therefore her life. As Annie grew up with her father, her own magical abilities began to manifest. Turns out she was an incredibly powerful pyrokinetic, and she loved her stuffed bear, which she named Tibbers. After several years, Grigori would remarry to a woman named Leanna. Leanna had a daughter of her own, Daisy, and therefore Annie had a new stepsister. The two got along quite well, actually, until tragedy struck. While the girls were playing in the forest, Daisy fell into a river, and though Annie tried to save her sister, the stress of the situation caused her fire magic to flare up, and the burst of flame scared Daisy enough that she let go, being lost to the waves and perishing. Though it was not really the young girl's fault, Leanna blamed Annie for Daisy's death, and this accusation led to another emotional flare-up of fire magic that burned down the family's house and killed Grigori. This only amplified Leanna's rage, and in the ashes of their burning home, she ripped Tibbers away from Annie and tried to tear her favorite toy into pieces. But guess what? That wasn't a normal teddy bear. Turns out that Ameline, unintentionally for the record, had infused the bear with a demon that she herself was bonded to during her time at the Ravenbloom Conservatory. This demon's name was Tybalk. Tybalk has actually also been briefly mentioned in this video. It was a long time ago at this point, but he was one of the demons in the service of Mordekaiser during his first reign. I know that very brief mention of the name definitely triggered some neurons for a few of you. So yeah, the bear manifested in full demon form for the first time, tore Leanna in half instead, and Annie, now extremely traumatized and kind of psychopathic, began wandering the countryside until she eventually ended up in Noxus at the Ravenbloom Conservatory, just like her mother. And then she burned it down at some point, and we don't actually know what happened to it after that. Maybe it got rebuilt, maybe it didn't. Now we move on to the second in the list of champions we are covering, who actually has a few similarities, this being Briar. Briar is not a vampire, but vampire adjacent. The League of Legends wiki calls her a blood golem, which is wild, but yeah, decently accurate. Briar is an artificial being created by an experiment done by the Black Rose. The goal of the experiment was to create a being fueled purely by blood magic, one who would not require sustenance outside of that and therefore could be the perfect assassin. This worked halfway. On the one hand, Briar was very, very good at killing things, but on the other, the not requiring food and water bit did not work at all and kind of got inverted. Briar was completely driven by a manic hunger for blood, and whenever she was released, she would go into a frenzy, killing anyone around her, enemy or ally, if they had blood she could consume. And, you know, if the only qualification is having blood, that's most living things, so she was a bit dangerous to be used effectively. This did mean that she had uses, of course. The Black Rose wasn't just going to let a perfect murder machine go to waste, so they constructed a magical pillory which could dampen her murderous frenzies, at least temporarily. This meant that they could just drop her somewhere, undo the pillory, and let everyone around her perish, but it also gave her something of a weakness, as if she could be restrained long enough, she could be totally neutralized, which is exactly what happened when the Black Rose sent her against Swain. Thus, she was captured and contained in a holding cell nearby several other experiments who had a similar blood-frenzying nature to her. But Briar somehow proved to be a little bit more independent than the other experiments, wanting to do more than just enter blood frenzies all the time and actually explore the world and make friends, and also consume blood sometimes. She's not like nice always, but she's better than others. This higher level of consciousness allowed her to befriend a janitor in her prison, and this janitor eventually helped her escape. Now Briar is just wandering around Noxus, as I said, making friends and also consuming blood occasionally. The Black Rose knows that she has escaped, for the record, but they're curious why exactly she grew to be more intelligent than the others, and so they're just sort of observing her and seeing what happens. Next up is Elise. This is a big one. Now, arguably, Elise could be covered in the Shadow Isles video. I flip-flopped back and forth on whether I wanted to put her in that one or in this Noxus one, and then I remembered that she was in the Noxus Bite Marks cinematic, and people were probably going to ask about the Spider Lady if I didn't bring her up, so we're just going to mention her today. That makes more sense. Elise was born a normal human woman, albeit one who was part of a very powerful Noxian house. As an adult, she was part of a political marriage secretly arranged by the Black Rose as a way to give Elise's new husband, one of their pawns, a lot more power. Unfortunately for the Rose, they underestimated Elise's own political capabilities. She was both wiser and more charismatic than her husband, and therefore was able to override pretty much anything that he wanted to do for her own ends, which pissed off everyone. The Rose was annoyed because their pawn couldn't do anything, and Elise's husband was embarrassed, so much so that over dinner one night, he poisoned his wife's wine and then dramatically announced that to her after she had taken a drink. This caused Elise's attitude to immediately flip. She threw herself down at her husband's feet, begging for forgiveness and apologizing for everything she had done, and then when her husband leaned down to address her, she stabbed him. Yeah, of course, she wasn't going to give up that easily. She assumed correctly that her husband would have the antidote somewhere on him so that he could give it to her after she apologized and thus exert more control over her. While he was bleeding out on the ground, she just took the antidote for herself. Even with the antidote, she was still sick for quite a while, and while she was bedridden, she was visited by LeBlanc, who was not particularly happy that Elise had killed a political pawn that they worked so hard to get into power. LeBlanc kind of tried to scare Elise, saying that she would now have to work for the Black Rose as repayment for the trouble she had caused, but Elise didn't actually have a problem with this. She saw the secretive cabal as a nice way to gain power, and so she was more than happy to sign up. Thus, she would become one of the Black Rose's most capable agents, and this was before the whole spider thing. We haven't gotten there yet. Sometime into her Black Rose career, Elise heard rumors of a magical artifact hidden in a far-off land called the Shadow Isles. This artifact was the skull of San Uzal, who we've mentioned so many times in this video, and that obviously had quite a bit of power to it, so Elise left on a quest to find the thing. She did not actually find it, the rumors were not true, and Mordekaiser's skull was not on the Shadow Isles, but she did find some magic in the form of an ancient spider god called the Vile Maw. The Vile Maw fully devoured the rest of the explorers on this expedition, but it only bit Elise, and the magic of its venom transformed her into the spider-like appearance that she is now more known for. But in keeping with the theme, this was not actually that big of a problem for her. Sure, she was a weird spider demon now, but she possessed the ability to shift between spider and human form at will. Plus, she can get midpoints between the two, which is what you see in the cinematic. Not only this, she now had the protection of the Vile Maw as one of its chosen, and this means she can safely move within the Shadow Isles, which are a very dangerous place normally, as this gigantic monster has watch over her. So now just an objectively better secret agent than she was, Elise returned to Noxus and kept working for the Black Rose, both in her original capacity and also as someone who operates in the Shadow Isles. Whenever there's rumors of weird magical stuff popping up there, they can just send Elise and she can go get it with less risk. It's not all upsides, of course. She does eat people now, and she usually just uses her beauty to seduce people into going on a trip to the Shadow Isles with her, where her and the god consume them. But hey, she was willing to kill men right from the start of her story, so I doubt she's too bothered. Oh, and we are staying in the territory of that cinematic because next up is the lady who was fighting Elise during it, Katarina. Much like Darius was, Katarina is a pretty straightforward character lore-wise, but one that has a whole lot of story to her. Katarina is one of the most skilled assassins in all of Noxus. She is also a member of the Dukuto family, one of the most powerful noble houses in the nation, but their allegiance is a little bit divided. Katarina's mother and sister, Cassiopeia, yes, her sister is a snake lady, that's because of Shuriman magic, we'll talk about it later, are agents of the Black Rose, but Katarina herself and her father are not. This kind of dichotomy of allegiance is very important to Katarina's whole thing. Half of her family is Black Rose, but she is loyal to Swain, and in fact is one of his most favored warriors. Then her father is in a whole separate category of allegiance, not Black Rose, but not on Swain's side either. Actually, Marcus Dukuto would later end up dying during a failed assassination attempt on Swain. Regardless, Katarina is still on good terms with the general. But despite this meaning that she has a very strong loyalty to Noxus and the Noxian Triferix government, her boyfriend is Demacian, and not just Demacian, it is Garen Crownguard, the literal poster boy for Demacia. They have a whole Romeo and Juliet kind of thing going on. It's cute. I mean, it's very much a trope of golden boy paladin and then his crush who is the evil, edgy assassin lady from an enemy empire, but the trope also just kind of makes it funnier. I like their relationship. Oh, there's also another member of Katarina's family on the list of characters we're covering today, so we're just going to break alphabetical order quickly because it makes sense to cover Talon now. Talon is going to be super quick. There are over 170 League of Legends characters in the game, more if you're watching this video in the future. Not all of them are going to be super fleshed out, and Talon is basically just your stereotypical D&D 5e rogue. He was an edgy street rat orphan type who learned how to assassinate people to survive in the Noxian underground, and then was later adopted by the Dukuto family when Katarina's father Marcus was impressed by his skills. Personality-wise, look at him, make an assessment, and you will be correct. Most notably, Marcus seems to like Talon a lot more than he likes Katarina. Katarina has disobeyed her father's orders on a few occasions, and then Marcus just straight up sent Talon to kill her, and after that he's been pretty clear about wanting Talon to be the heir of the family. But for now, though, that's kind of all that I have to say about him. Maybe the Noxus show will make him more interesting. He's very simple now, though, and I'm slapping him in here because he doesn't really fit in any other region. He's just a generic Noxus guy. Gonna take a huge thematic swing now, though, as moving the alphabetical order means we are going from Talon to Kled, who is very different. Though he's not going to take a lot more time. Kled is a Yordle, which is a being from the spirit realm. I'm gonna have a whole video dedicated to Yordles and their home realm and how exactly they work, but they're just kind of like weird little mischievous elf gremlin types. Most of them are very nice and friendly, but Yordles are also not a monolith. They can have their own interests, and Kled likes fighting. At some point in ancient history, Kled moved from the Yordle home realm of Bandle City to Noxus, and has just been fighting in their wars ever since. And very importantly, Yordles are immortal, and since he showed up in Noxus so long ago, he has been in every single one of their conflicts. Kled is a joke character for the most part. Like, there aren't that many comedic characters in Noxus, which makes sense, but there should be one, and this is the one we have. He is a caricature of military brass, and his title very well showcases that. Technically, Kled has many titles, since he's just been in the military for so long that he's basically been in every position, and he has a habit of saying them all at once, meaning that Kled's title, as he will usually describe it, is Lord Colonel Major Centurion Rear Forward Brigadier Admiral Forward Admiral Major Sir Admiral Major Lieutenant Sergeant Commodore Sergeant General Colonel Sergeant Double Admiral High Major Commodore of the 1st Legion 3rd Multiplication Double Admiral Artillery Vanguard Company Lord Major Admiral of the 2nd Legion's Forward Artillery Cavalry Multiplication. Also, he rides like a chicken lizard thing. This species is called a Dracolops, and Kled's Dracolops is named Scarl. Kled and Scarl are just silly little guys. Silly little guys who do a lot of violence, yes, but silly and little nonetheless. Now we're going to take another big thematic swing because the next character is sad again. This character is Rel. Now, I've already mentioned her a little bit in this video, but I wanted to go deeper into her backstory, largely because they have just recently connected her directly to Ambessa, and that kind of feels like they're setting her up to be in the Noxus show. Rel is a mage with the ability to control metal. Now, because I know people are going to ask, think of this less like Magneto and more like Avatar metal bending, but in a fantasy world where most people don't have magic and are just using metal weapons and armor, she is extremely powerful. Rel was born to a disgraced noble family, which now lived in the Noxian slums. She had an interest in fighting from a young age, often sneaking into the arena to watch Reckoner fights, and her parents didn't like that at first, until they learned that Reckoners could make a lot of money, at which point they changed their minds. This meant that she very quickly became nothing more than her parents' ticket back to wealth and success, so they treated her very poorly. However, Rel still did win most of her fights, and her capability eventually caught the eye of Ambessa Medarda. Rel ends up joining Ambessa's warband, and this is a big part of the recently released Ambessa novel that I keep bringing up. This next section is also going to have some spoilers for that novel, so if you haven't read it yet and want to, you might want to skip forward a couple minutes. It's with Ambessa's group that Rel discovers her magical abilities. I know I led by explaining what they are, but she doesn't technically unlock them until this period. All of her fighting up to this point was just on her own skill. Unfortunately, this power also attracted the attention of the Black Rose, who kidnapped the girl and took her to the Rose Guard Academy, where they experimented on her. Rel's lore also gives us a big piece of information about how being magic-born in Runeterra works. It's revealed through her stories that the Black Rose figured out a process by which they can remove magical energy from people and then infuse it into someone else, leaving the original nothing but a withered husk called a null. This process was forced onto Rel a lot, but she was on the receiving end. The Rose put her in a lot of arena matches against other mages, and when she inevitably won, the loser's power would be stripped from them and given to the victor. Eventually, this comes to a head. Rel uses her abilities to escape and vows to take down both the Black Rose and Noxus as a whole for allowing such atrocities to happen within their borders. And this is her status quo at the end of the novel, so you can see why I'm kind of thinking they're setting her up for the show. Also, I'm just going to point this out very clearly for anyone who did not know Rel already and didn't pick this up from the quick visuals. Her horse is purely made of metal. She uses her power to construct that thing, and then she can also turn it into a suit of armor at will. Rel's powers are super cool, and I want to see them animated more. Next, we have another character who I think has pretty high odds of being in the animated show, Riven. Riven as a character is very connected to the Ionian invasion, and though we've established that the show will be taking place after that, I would not be surprised if she makes an appearance. Riven's history starts off pretty normal for a Noxian. She was born on a farm, later joined the military, and rose up through the ranks, eventually becoming such a decorated soldier that she got the attention of Emperor Darkwill, who bestowed upon her a magic blade. Riven was then sent to Ionia as part of the invading force, and fought there for most of the war. We don't know too much about what specifically she did during this time, but we do know about one of her final battles. During this conflict, Riven was fighting near a wagon which was carrying some Noxian weaponry. This wagon was then struck by a stray arrow and detonated, as the weaponry inside was one of the first examples of Dr. Revik's chemical weapons. Despite being right next to the blast, Riven was fine, as she reacted quick enough to use the protective runes embedded in her sword. But no one else was so lucky, and from her shield, she witnessed everyone on the battlefield, Ionian and Noxian alike, die a horrible, agonizing death to the expanding clouds of gas. Needless to say, this was extremely traumatizing, enough that Riven left the Noxian military entirely and shattered the blade that Emperor Darkwill had given to her. Riven then remained in Ionia as a form of self-imposed exile and started working on a farm there. She would later face trial and punishment for her role in the Noxian invasion and a semi-related magical murder that also happened, but that's more of an Ionia storyline, so I'll revisit it in that video. Riven is very much a character with affiliation in both of these regions, and honestly, her current status quo puts her well on the Ionia side, but since there's the whole survivor's guilt with the chem weapons thing, I thought she was definitely worth bringing up and discussing in the Noxus video. Now one that I know some people have been waiting for, Scion. Scion is not even that complicated of a character, but he is undeniably badass, and so he has gained a fan base. Scion comes from a time that we skipped over in the history section of the video. He is Noxian and was born after the founding of the nation, but he is also from before the reign of Emperor Darkwill. Scion was one of the most feared warriors of the era, not because he was particularly intelligent or strategic, but rather because the man was damn near unstoppable. He had sworn an oath to his ancestors to never take a step backwards in battle, and he held to that oath. But despite his incredible strength and resistance to pain, he was a mortal man and therefore met his end, as all men do. Oh, hello. Been a while since we've heard that, but I had to get one more in. His death would arrive during one of the first large-scale battles against Demacia. Scion was not messing around in this fight, breaking all the way through the Demacian front line and getting to their king, Jarvan I. Jarvan and Scion then entered into not actually a 1v1 in the slightest. Remember, this was happening in the Demacian backline. There were plenty of soldiers around trying to stop this terrifying man who had broken their ranks, but Scion didn't really care about any of them. Their fight was brutal, and Jarvan was the one to deliver the first fatal blow, but Scion did not fall immediately. His fate was sealed, the strike was lethal, but as he was dying, he grabbed Jarvan by the neck and strangled him, both as he was bleeding out and the rest of the Demacians were dogpiling, trying to get him to let go of their king. Both warriors died that day, making the battle a definitive victory for the Noxians, a Pyrrhic one sure, but a victory nonetheless. Scion's body was then recovered, still with a death grip on Jarvan's crown in the other hand that he hadn't used to kill him. He was given a warrior's funeral and laid to rest under the Immortal Bastion, where he would remain for about 50 years, until the Black Rose got a hold of him, because of course it was them. This was still in a period of good relations between the Black Rose and Borum Darkwill, so as a gift to their emperor, the Black Rose used a whole lot of necromancy and basically turned the ancient warrior into what I can best describe as half zombie, half train. Of course, his corpse was missing a few pieces at this point which had rotted away, but that wasn't anything that the Black Rose couldn't handle. They were easily able to replace things, including replacing his jaw with the crown of King Jarvan that Scion still held in his hand. In his second go-around, Scion was even more brutal and unstoppable, to such an extent that it was Darkwill himself who ordered Scion to be chained again. He was just too much of a liability to have on the battlefield. Now, under the rule of Jericho Swain, Scion spends most of his time in his tomb waiting for Swain to unleash him again, which does happen. Scion is not just a looming threat, he is someone that does get to visit the battlefield from time to time, and it's never easy to put him back when those battles are over. And now we reach the final character that we're going to be covering today, Smolder. Smolder's another pretty easy one. He's just a little baby dragon. There's actually a decent amount of dragons in Runeterra, but they're not typically found in Noxus. We'll talk about where they are found later. Smolder ended up in the nation though because a group of Noxian hunters kidnapped him. Smolder's mother was able to track down the hunters who were leaving their island by boat, and the boat did not survive its encounter with a full-scale dragon, but unfortunately that meant that Smolder was also lost in the waves. Smolder landed on a nearby coast, befriended a human boy, taught himself how to breathe fire, and then proceeded to accidentally set an entire forest ablaze, which turned out to be very good as that fire caught the attention of Smolder's mother, who then found him again. I summarized this very nicely, and it seems like a quick wrap-up. Keep in mind, this is on a dragon lifespan timescale, so Smolder was alone for decades during this period. But now he's okay, and he's with his mom again, and since dragons age super slowly, he's still a baby, so everything worked out. We need at least one character who's not incredibly violent and or traumatized. And on that surprisingly happy note, we are done with the Noxian characters, at least the ones that we are going to talk about today. I'll say it again just for the sake of clarity, there are other Noxus affiliated characters, but I've decided to mention them in future videos because I think that's gonna flow better. Again, my goal is to mention every League of Legends champion in this Runeterra 101 series, barring newly released characters who are heavily affiliated with a region that I've already covered. I mean, I'm sure I'm gonna have to do correction videos at some point, but I'll cross that bridge when I get to it. Anyway, this video has gone on far longer than I originally intended it to, because in the researching process, I just kind of kept finding things that I wanted to mention and then throwing them in, so I will keep the conclusion quick at least. Hopefully all the lore that we've covered today has done a good job of getting people excited for the upcoming Noxus show. I mentioned this about halfway through the video, but Noxus is going to be such a perfect setting for the very nuanced storytelling that we saw in Arcane. The nature of videos like this means that I have to hit everything kinda quickly because there's just so much that I have to cover, but imagine seeing some of these storylines in full animation through character perspectives and all that. Oh, it's gonna be incredible. Especially given that most of the Noxian characters we've seen are warriors, the nation often looks from the outside like a place of pain and violence, and that's not inaccurate, but it is underselling it a little bit. Beyond the crimes of their leaders, both official and from the shadows, for the common people, Noxus can be a place of ambition, confidence, and a weird sense of community, even if you wouldn't pick up on it being on the other side of their invasions. And at the end of the day, the quality that makes Noxus most admirable is the one that I've mentioned several times over. Noxus does genuinely value equality. No matter who you are, where you came from, or what your circumstances were before, if you are willing and able to fight for a better life, you can find that in Noxus. And this isn't just a pipe dream, that is an actual value that they stand by. I can think of some real-world places that could learn a thing or two. Are Noxian ideals for everyone? No, of course not, and despite the apparent thought of their leaders, it shouldn't be. But the fact remains that Noxus has a lot more to it underneath its armor, and I am very excited to see more of that explored. Thank you all so much for watching. I have an actual announcement today, so let's just hop into that really quickly before people click away. I have a Patreon now. I mentioned this in a couple community posts already, but this is the first time that it's actually been brought up in a video. For those of you who don't know, TikTok has been my primary platform for several years at this point. I have like 870 something thousand followers on there, and it's been my main source of income. But TikTok is also super unstable all the time now. YouTube is definitely where the future of my work is. I think this platform is a lot better for the videos that I do for a number of reasons, and if you want to help support me in making more of these videos, especially as I transition away from that other platform, Patreon is a great way to do it, and there are perks, obviously. Patreon benefits include early and ad-free access to all of my long-form content. This is the first video that's actually going up on early access there, but my entire backlog is already there ad-free for you. And a new Patreon exclusive video every month. The first one of those is also already up. It's a Marvel one about Stingray, Namor's best friend and one of my favorite obscure Marvel weirdos. You can find the link to that in the description of this video on my channel page, and my username is also just the exact same as it is here. You know how to find it, and huge thank you to everyone who's already supporting me over there and is going to check it out. It does seriously help me out so much, especially since our wonderful, wonderful government is flip-flopping on whether my main income should be illegal or not. On a happier note, thank you to Ruben Perez, the artist who drew the poses of the character that you've been watching talk at you for a while now. Actually, the YouTube channel has been going so well that we should be getting a few new poses in for this guy soon, so keep an eye out for those in upcoming videos. And that marks the last announcement that I have for today. One more time, thank you all so much for watching. The next video should be out pretty soon. The gap between them will get shorter as the platform transition continues, so as usual, stay tuned for more.